Welcome to the Chicago Bears Podcast, a presentation of ESPN Chicago, Chicago's home for sports. Here's your host, Pat, the designer.
Bear down, Bears fans. Welcome in to a Tuesday edition of the Chicago Bears podcast. And my God, we actually have something to break down with tangible players on the field. Courtney Cronin's in the building. She was at OTAs. Courtney, what's going on?
It is really nice that we have laid eyes on the full squad, or at least most of it. There were a couple subtractions and a couple absences during their second OTA practice, which was the first one we got to watch. But it's the part of the offseason that just drags. And once you get to OTAs, you can finally see how these pieces are at the very beginning starting to fit together. So yes, I'm with you. It's nice that we finally have real things to talk about.
No more dreaming. We got a lot to get into, a lot of breakdown. Talk with Courtney about what she saw on the field, some of the players that were there, some of the players that weren't there. Got to get into that as well. And then just looking at some of the things that that Justin Fields talked about, Coach Flus talked about, all that and more on today's episode of the Chicago Bears podcast. Let's get into the first quarter, Courtney, because we got a lot. First things first, right? Here's my first thing in the first quarter. Who's the mic guy in the press room? Who's the mic guy? He's got to get listen, if we're going to be a Super Bowl caliber team, the mic guy's got to get on his job a little bit quicker, because this is how it sounds to the rest of us. Darnell, right? Yeah, I love Darnell. He's a really good guy. And I mean, who's the mic guy out here?
You know, this is not the first time I have been asked this question to track down whoever's running the AV for the Chicago Bears in that media room. But no, you're not the first person, Pat, to bring that up. And I know that it is difficult to hear, but there were a lot of questions asked. I asked a bunch, so I'm happy to elaborate on what the questions actually were if you have the answers you want to talk about.
That's how we're going to do this every press conference from now on. I will just reread you the answers and you tell me what the question is. That's the more important part.
I'll be like Sean McVay, like when they remember that time at training camp where they were asking him to rattle off plays from 5 years ago. Oh, that was this XYZ. Oh, that was Pat Finley asking this question. No, that's what I'll do. That's my job. I will make sure that I can just be straight up Rain Man and be like, oh yeah, that was a question asked at minute 308. And that was Tremaine Edmonds talking about the culture inside this organization versus the Bills and et cetera, et cetera. That's my job now.
Hey, I love it. I think we've got a good rapport here. We're going to have a dominant podcast. Got to be able to get that deposit for the fun house that's going to happen later down the line. The one thing that we do want to talk about as we get into this, because there were a lot of a good amount of show up for or turnout for the OTAs. It is voluntary, but there were some noticeable guys that weren't there today. Number one on the list probably is Jalen Johnson. What was the sense that you got? Is this a contract issue? Is this just, it was simply a voluntary thing and I didn't want to come? Or is Jalen Johnson kind of drawing an initial line in the sand here? What are your thoughts?
Well, we know it's not injury related because Matt Eberflus was asked directly about the hand injury that Jalen Johnson sustained. It was late in December and he was put on IR December 23rd and we didn't see him again. It was not related to that because if it's an injury, at this time of year, coaches technically do not have to say anything about it, but Flus did not teeter the line of, no, I'm not just going to say anything whatsoever. He said that with that hand, he felt like Jalen Johnson was good to go. So the overarching thing that you get from many coaches, Matt Eberflus included, is that this is the voluntary part of the offseason program. And whether this is going to affect the mandatory part of the offseason program, which is mini camp in the beginning of June, remains to be seen. But I think more than anything, I'm going to pull up this quote, with Jalen Johnson and with, there were a couple other absences. He was obviously the notable one because he is entering a contract year. We do know that hearing from him at the Super Bowl that he expected that contract talks would end up picking up at some point in the near future. It's May 23rd and he does not have a new deal. No new deals have been struck for any of the current Bears players who are in line to get new deals, whether it's him, whether it's Cole Kmet. Neither of those players have secured their future beyond the 2023 season in Chicago. So It's interesting because I do think that with what Justin Fields was just talking about, it kind of from like a very, 30,000 foot level, like, do you feel that you have a responsibility to make sure guys are here for, this workout? And he said, not really. The only guys that he felt really needed to be here were the new players and, the younger players to learn the offense. But with vets, and he brought up Jalen Johnson, those guys who have proven themselves on the field. He said that he knows what he can do on the field. He's proven it many times against top receivers, and that he's, quote, not really worried about it too much. So the Bears went through this with Roquan Smith, and, what's different is Roquan actually showed up for the offseason program last year. Like, he did his part. It was training camp that he ends up getting put on the PUP list and all of that crazy stuff that happened, which the Bears don't want to go through again. And I think what Eberflus said just about, do you think it could get potentially to that level? You just went through this a year ago. The guy's here and holding in, Roquan Smith, that is. Does it feel like it's teetering on that edge with Jalen Johnson? And I don't think it's there just yet. I mean, again, this is the thing with like it's voluntary in nature, but it's not really, because if you're not there, you stand out. Like, unless there's, a birth of a child, an injury. I'm thinking of other things that I've, covered in my years covering the NFL of why guys miss the off-season program. If it's not something that, is a clear cut, like this is the reason he's not here, then it does kind of raise a little bit of I don't want to say a red flag, but it does raise some eyebrows. So because his is not injury related and because he's in a contract year, we're going to be talking about that. And I did think it was interesting because Nate Davis is not here, and there was no indication that it's injury related with him. He is one of those guys that Justin Fields was referring to, a new player in this offense. And Fields expects players that are new and rookies to be here to learn the offense. Like, Nate Davis wasn't here today. And so is that potentially, he signed his contract back in March during free agency. Is that potentially something that's a little concerning? Because that one didn't make a whole ton of sense. And then, of course, the other ones, with the injuries that Darnell Mooney dealt with last year in the same game, Eddie Jackson goes out with the Liz Frank. Eberflus didn't give a timeline, and he's not going to, because it's early, it's middle of May and they still have time before training camp. But he said that, they're progressing the way that they need to be. So I think that's really all you can kind of look into from that perspective right now about how much longer it's going to take for those guys to come back. I would not anticipate either of them here for the offseason program.
The biggest concern that I would say with the Jalen Johnson situation is the fact that Tyreek Stevenson, for what we're hearing, seems like he came out and he's adjusting really well. It was funny to hear Flus go. He asked him, how the new guys, acclimated themselves. Have you noticed a lot of the rookies? Knows what he said. We're really in their books and knowing the system on the offseason program. He's like, I'm not going to give individual praise, and then proceeded to give four guys individual praise. Love that. But Tyree Stevenson was one of the guys that he brought up. And is that a potential where you look at Jalen Johnson and say, hey, bud, like this might not be the time that you want to miss, because there is a young guy who is coming in, is kind of making his waves in a way that they weren't expecting maybe right away. That could be your spot right there.
It's interesting because I remember when they drafted Stevenson, and if you use a third round pick on a cornerback, like that's somebody that you expect to contribute pretty early on, knowing how thin they are still at that position. And I think it's twofold. I think that, of course, they needed depth at the spot at that position, like starting depth. Like they need somebody else, probably not Kindle Vildor, to play the outside cornerback spot opposite Jalen Johnson. But it could also be a precursor to, hey, we might not be and this is, just a theory that I have, like that if they're not sold on Jalen Johnson, if they don't want to pay him right now, if they're saying, hey, we want to see that interception total because it's been low the last couple of years. If we want to see that tick up.
Which one is your favorite?
Good point. If they want to see that number go to a certain threshold before they're willing to pay him, and if it doesn't, then you've got the next guy right in line. Like it's a great contingency plan, assuming Tyreek Stevenson works out, and we know that they're going to be starting to work him on the outside. He has some slot flexibility, but I think that's a job for Kyler Gordon, and they're happy with Kyler Gordon and his progression after the first year and where it could go. But It'll be really interesting to see. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad thing for Johnson and like, oh, you better not miss any more of the offseason program. There's this guy who's going to come steal your job, because not right now. Like that's a conversation maybe for, if there were more cornerbacks back there. There just really isn't. So I don't think him not being here is hurting him by any stretch in terms of the contract negotiations. It's just been really quiet on that front. And this is the first offseason we've had where we knew the staff had players that were eligible for extensions that they were going to pay. It wasn't a Roquan Smith situation. It wasn't, anybody, Khalil Mack, Robert Quinn, any of those where you knew they were probably on the outside looking in with this organization. Those are two players that you could, in a lot of ways build around, and we'll see how they want to do that. But we don't have any sort of basis to go off of when the Bears like to do contract extensions. I remember when I covered the Vikings, you could always expect that they would always reward guys early. So about like 2 to 3 years in a deal, if somebody had outperformed their contract, you knew July 24th, 25th, those new extensions were coming. We don't have a feel for how Poles is going to operate like that yet, if it's going to be an early off season as of right now or something closer to training camp.
Yeah, it was interesting to see a lot of the guys that weren't there. But I was actually surprised by one of the names that we heard about being there, because we haven't heard much about him at all. Lucas Patrick apparently was in the building. Shout out to Lucas Patrick, working his way back, and looked like they were trying him out a little bit of guard, just based off of what I gleaned from the questioning. How did Lucas Patrick look being back on the field?
Well, it's hard to tell because we were way at the other end.
Where are they putting
field.
You guys now? Where are they throwing?
So they were on fields 3 and 4, which are the outside fields,
right,
and like the furthest ones away near the Walter Payton Center. And like we were on the side, like the end zone, the farthest end zone, but you know where those train tracks are?
Yes. Yeah.
So we're way over there. So you can't really see a whole bunch, but you were able to see. And of course, the Nate Davis absence today factors in here as to why there was some switching at right guard. Ja'Tari Carter was getting, those reps along with Lucas Patrick, and they were splitting with the ones. And, outside of that position, the offensive line with the first team more or less stayed the same, where you have Braxton Jones at left tackle, no brainer. Tevin Jenkins, they said, was going to play in left guard. He's playing left guard. Cody Whitehair at center. And that might be an easier position, an easier fit for him to go from guard back to center. That's what I got from Matt Eberflus. And then Darnell Wright is the right tackle on this team. There's no question about it. You don't draft a guy 10th overall and expect him to have to work his way in. I mean, hell, you had Braxton Jones as a 5th round rookie last year, earning that left tackle spot and never giving it back. But it's, I'm curious to see for Lucas Patrick, because we know that's only, we expect it only to be able to see him right there and Ja'Tari Carter right there, because Nate Davis wasn't here. If Nate Davis is here, is Lucas Patrick a backup? Is he potentially, really good depth for you between the center and guard spots? We know that he has flexibility with both, but what a turn of events for somebody who they brought in last year to be their starting center, and injuries in one season may or may not have knocked him out of that role completely.
Is it a concern that he could still be dealing with the injury, or is it that he's just, because I guess I don't have much to go off of. The 4 plays he played in the Patriots game, he actually looked like a really good center, and what he did with the Packers, he looked like a really good center. But it feels like they've just given that job to Cody Whitehair, even though he has played center before. It just feels like, okay, this is Cody's job, and Lucas is kind of the odd man looking in.
I think that it's Whitehair's job to lose for a number of reasons. The experience that he has at center, the lack of injuries. I mean, last year was his first stint ever, I'm 99% sure, on injured reserve, which, that bodes well. And on top of that, it's contractually, you have to justify that contract. In any other year, that's a salary cap casualty, or that's a restructure. But the fact that he has the second highest cap hit on this team, he's the longest tenured player way before this regime. You've got to justify why you're paying somebody, double digits to be playing center and to be playing on the offensive line and not a premier spot at tackle. So that's one that I viewed as kind of you have to read between the lines there of what they want to do. Of course, you want to have the best starting five out there, and they will. Injuries affected this line, as we saw from like the very start of training camp. So they want to make sure they have the depth there. Lucas Patrick may just be better served in a role where if they do, and they will, because it happens, if they do have to switch things around, you have a quality backup versus somebody that you're paying a lot of money to, and you might as well justify that paycheck by having the guy start at center because you think he is a better center.
Yeah. I like what you said about the durability too, because the one thing you don't want that we saw last season from your center position is, all right, throw this guy in there now. All right, throw this guy in there now. I do like the fact that it feels like they're at least acknowledging the center to quarterback connection and the importance of it. So I do like that as well.
Did you see your doppelganger, Sam Mustipher, signed with the Baltimore Ravens? Did you see that?
I did see that he signed with the Ravens. I also sent out a tweet immediately after saying that I will be showing up for Lamar's funeral because you got my bad. You always got to watch your back when you talk about Sam Mustipher because Olin Kreutz might be right around the corner.
Oh, God.
Just playing, Olin. I love you. I love you, dog. Please don't hurt me. But no, I did see that, and it's interesting. I'm impressed that I guess that tells you kind of sometimes those PFF numbers work in your favor. I'll say that. Let's get into this second quarter. Because we do got to talk about the quarterback connection and what this offense is looking like very, very, very early on. We all have to say this, right? Because this is the time of year where if Justin Fields throws an interception, it's like, I told you guys, he has no accuracy. He's not and if he throws a touchdown, he's the next Tom Brady. You know what I mean? So, but we did hear a lot about the Fields to DJ Moore connection, more so today than yesterday. Justin said it was just because kind of there were more plays drawn up for DJ. What did you see out of that connection? What did you see? Does it feel like they're gelling early and that DJ is the clear-cut number one?
I mean, he is the clear-cut number one. And I asked Fields about something that Tyke Tolbert said 2 weeks ago at rookie camp, that this is a group where you have more established wide receivers. Like, you're not trying to figure out what guys can do and what they can't do. Like, you know what you have. And naturally, that's going to help the quarterback. And, you know, Fields knows that DJ Moore is your one. He's your X. He's playing outside. And, the deep ball connection that we saw today, one memorable one during, there's throwing routes on air during the individual period. And then, of course, the deep ball down the far sideline in the team period in 11-on-11 was a beautiful catch. And I, single coverage for DJ Moore there and listening to him kind of break down what happened, how it worked, and hearing Fields say, like, how does this guy get separation? How does he, the speed element there is so critical, Pat, because, and I thought Fields said this perfectly, that he's never going to be running 100% on any given route because he has that extra gear that he can kick in and accelerate and be able to find that space between himself and the defensive back to, give his quarterback a more clean target. Who can you say did that exact same thing on last year's roster? You can't. So I think naturally you have a quarterback who's really excited and about the potential of what this receiver group can be. But it starts with someone like DJ Moore, who they brought in for a reason. And it's not just to elevate that room that you have you can have a receiver that has, more than 493 receiving yards. It's to give your quarterback a security blanket, to give him the guy that he trusts, to be able to throw to a spot, because that's one reason it all correlates. Like last year, the big question going into training camp, at least, or going into the season, was, will Justin Fields be able to get rid of the ball faster? Is it on the offensive line? Is it on the receivers not creating separation, not getting to where they need to be? And the answer is yes to all of it. But I think for Fields to be able to trust he can throw a guy open and throw to a spot and that his guy is going to get there, he didn't have that trust last year. It was evident in what showed up on film. So he has that now in the very early stages, and he's building that with DJ Moore. So I think, for the fact that they were both very honest and more too, about how, yesterday was, it's a work in progress. Today's definitely better than yesterday. That stuff matters because they're building upon something, and you just don't have to guess about who's going to be what in this offense. And frankly, the receiver battle to see, do they keep 5? Do they keep 6 on this roster, knowing what the tight end room is going to look like? It'll be really interesting to see what who gets those 1 or 2 bottom spots, because it feels like the depth chart, at least on paper right now, is pretty much set for some of the more premier, predominant receiver roles.
I was cracking up because, like, whenever there's a new connection, it's always, oh man, we love each other. It's the greatest thing when you guys ask, what's the relationship like? Oh man, he's my best friend. And DJ was just honest. He was like, I mean, it's working. Yeah, I mean, hey, we getting it together. Like, I like him. I feel like that's the first time I've ever heard somebody do that. Like, normally it's just like, I love this guy, he's my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
I've always watched him from afar. DJ was just so honest. He was like, I ain't really pay attention to him last season at all, except when we played him. So shout out to him. He looked good for this season.
Yeah. And I asked him about that because he's coming in as a foreigner into this team, because he hasn't been around the Justin Fields progression of having year 1 and then having to like undo a bunch of things within his mechanics for year 2. And now where he's at in year 3, like this is his first look up close at Justin Fields. And he really hasn't. He doesn't have anything, if there was any sort of like bias or any sort of thing that like other players have about, man, Fields does this well, he doesn't do this well. DJ Moore's coming in with a clean slate. Like, he doesn't know truly what the menu looks like of Justin Fields just yet, because he hasn't experienced a full off season. But, he feels like he's going to be, I think, what did he say? Like, I asked him, he's like, I think he'll be great, this season. Like, what else is he going to say?
Yeah.
Like, he came here, and I mean, it wasn't his choice. He was traded, but it goes back to DJ Moore being able to produce with whoever the hell is throwing in the ball. I mean, that happened in his situation in Carolina. I think that you kind of like resign yourself to the fact of that's not something I can control as a wide receiver. And I can't control if Justin Fields is going to be great, if he's going to be good, if he's going to be elite, if he's going to like take a step back. He can't control any of that. All he can do is be the guy who does create that separation to give you the deep threat. But certainly, it's not just that he's like your stretch of the field, post route guy. He can do that, but he can, and he knows he's going to have to learn the entire offense and all of the routes that, are part of this tree. He's your number 1 though. That is your security blanket for Justin Fields. That's why you made this investment, and why trading the number 1 pick in the way that they did came down to DJ Moore has to be part of this equation or we're not getting a deal done.
Does it feel like, at least at first glance, right, that Justin is a lot more comfortable kind of in this system going into year 2? We heard him talk about that he feels better about the fact that, he can come in and he kind of knows how things are going to go. He understands how OTAs are going to be set up, different things like that. But does it feel like he's just more comfortable just even early on, right, just going through his progressions, going through his reads and where he needs to be, and even just sometimes putting the ball out there and trusting that the receiver is going to be there? Yeah,
and I mean, he said as much. I mean, this is so different for him because, for the first time since he was in college, like, that last year at Ohio State, and I mean, he had different quarterbacks coaches back then. Like, this is same coach calling the plays, same quarterbacks coach, same offensive coordinator, same offense. Where last year, that whole term of drinking from a fire hose, I think would have been an accurate representation of everything Justin Fields was dealing with during OTAs. And remember, because of Matt Eberflus getting hired in the new front office, they started OTAs like in April last year. We were out here right before the draft. I think it was like 420. And we were, watching them and watching Justin Fields, like very simple concepts that end up obviously playing a huge role and are not simple in a lot of respects, just of the footwork. Like last year at this time, it was I'm changing the foot I drop back with, because all of that times up with when I need to release the ball, where my receiver needs to be in his route progression, all of those things. It's elementary in the standpoint. I mean, obviously it's very complicated stuff, but it's elementary in the standpoint of he's past that step now. He's not starting from ground zero and having to learn something, a whole new language, which offenses are. He gets to come in, all right, I know the offense. I know what plays we ran last year. We're starting to incorporate more plays, and they will continue to do that over the next, 4 or 5 weeks before they get to the break between mini camp and training camp. But, for this quarterback, the belief the team has in him, the fact that he's here in his third year and he knows what's going to be asked of him, that like there's a comfort level to, hey, I've done this before. I know what's required of me to play quarterback in this offense. And by the way, the team has invested in me. It's very clear by the additions that they made, and that's not lost on Fields. I think that really, that sort of backing too has him probably walking in here. I mean, he's a very confident human being and a leader of this team. The Bears know that, and that's something that I think they knew not long into last season, that he was probably the guy from that respect. But for his progression as a quarterback and what's next, you don't have to like relearn everything and then be playing catch up when it comes time to get to training camp. He's in a spot now where he has mastered so many of like the beginning steps, and he can then like pick up with a new chapter once they get to training camp.
How are we feeling about Chase Claypool and understanding this playbook? I heard that asked as well, but I think that's the biggest concern because like another one of my doppelgangers, I told Ryan Poles basically to go out and get him, and he gets him like 2 days later. So, everybody's looking at me like, you did this to us. Is Chase Claypool look like he's at least understanding, knowing where to line up, turning himself back into that guy that we hoped to see?
So my first impression of him today, and this is going to sound dumb, but like he's 6'4". He's listed as 6'4" on the roster. He looks so much taller in person than I remembered. And I know that at 24 years old, however old he is, he didn't have a growth spurt. At least I think that your gender probably ends their growth spurt a little bit sooner than that.
I think we can grow. How long can we grow? Yeah, all the way to like 25, I think, actually.
Okay, maybe
didn't Luol Deng grow again? Maybe
he grew an inch. I don't know. I just remember like thinking to myself, and I asked a couple of the beat writers, I'm like, does he look taller to you, or did I get shorter? Did my perspective change? So from the physical part, he looks every bit of the receiver that they brought in. Yeah. And Fields answered a question that I asked like, about the mechanics, going back to like the footwork. Like, now that you mastered that part, what's the next technical thing that you want to do? Like what you really want to focus on? And he said, of course, like it's just going faster and mastering all of that, getting on the same page with his guys and working guys in. And he specifically mentioned Chase Claypool, which I thought was interesting because you'll remember one of the lasting images of the season last year was the game in Detroit where he's having a meltdown on the sideline and Fields, goes up to him and says something to him. And it was very honest about that afterwards, about like what he had to do to kind of like regain control of that situation. And then, the interceptions that, Tim Boyle threw at the end of the week 18 game. And I believe that Claypool was targeted on both of those. And to my understanding, Claypool ran the wrong route on those interceptions. So that's, that part of Chase Claypool is our lasting memory of what he looked like during the 2022 season. How Justin Fields was talking about him makes it sound like this is somebody who got refreshed this offseason, that his work ethic is really, really good, that he has an attitude change. Those are direct words that Justin Fields used. And I think that's pretty powerful when your quarterback is noting this change in you, and that you are, the improvement from last year to now. 6 months ago, it was a completely different player trying to learn this offense. And I think there have been some excuses given to Chase Claypool of, he got here in November. He didn't have time to learn the whole playbook. And different positions require different things. Because I remember like last year when Baker Mayfield like slept for like 5 minutes on the plane going to Los Angeles, and then they end up, I believe, winning that game on Thursday Night Football after he was traded. Like we were like, how come Baker Mayfield can pick up a whole offense? He's a quarterback. He needs to know more than just like running a route. And then how come Chase Claypool can't do it? Like those excuses are null and void now. Whatever they were last year, whether there's any validity to that is gone. And so, I really believe that this will be such a pivotal year for him, not just from a contract perspective, because he was a 2020 draft pick, so he's eligible in year 4 to get that extension. They've got to see him produce. So I think when you hear from guys about receivers and quarterbacks about the offseason, that it's not just like getting to know guys on the field, it's building that trust off of it. We saw several things where Justin Fields and Chase Claypool have, been out together. They went to that Bulls game right after DJ Moore was traded here, and everything like that, I think matters, because Fields needs to know that he can trust this guy to get open, to do his job, and to have an attitude that isn't going to tear the locker room apart. Because when you're on a 3-14 team, and hopefully for their sake, they're not repeating that, you can't have a locker room cancer. You can't have somebody whose attitude, if it's negative, it's going to affect the rest of the receiver room and what you're trying to build.
No, yeah, it did feel like I do like how Justin took control of that, and it seems like he's kind of taken, I don't want to say taking Chase Claypool under his wing, like he's the vet on the team, but kind of it does feel like that, where we've come into this season with Chase Claypool's got to perform, but maybe he's the one who we don't really have a clear-cut position for. But it sounds like, just hearing from Justin today, that, you know, Chase is going to be a major part of this offense, maybe even more so than Darnell Mooney off the bat, just because of the size of the ability to go up and see it. So we'll see what we get out of him. Let's keep this thing moving along, because it's halftime, Courtney, my favorite time, always, especially with you, because you always have nuggets and fun things. Speaking of nuggets, the Denver Nuggets won last night.
They did. They did. And LeBron started some unnecessary drama. Like the whole idea that he's not coming back, Pat. Do you buy into it? Do you buy it for a second? I think it's BS.
LeBron will be back.
We have been told, I don't know how many times, that he's playing with Bronny. He's 38. Got to make it 2 more years so Bronny can go his 1 year at USC and then he can get into the league. I think this was LeBron's last conference finals. I don't think he's done in the NBA. I think he will end up playing next year, because this is somebody who, like, I know his feet are all tore up too. I mean, he had plantar fascia, I think, on both feet, which is, I can't imagine like not being able to plant normally and to play through that sort of pain. But it's a talking point, and thank God for it, because we have so many days in between, like that, you know, that series ending. I believe that the Celtics are going to lose tonight again too. So 2 sweeps. So history on the line. But we have so much time in between the conference finals and the NBA finals that we need this LeBron drama to percolate a little bit so we can have something to talk about.
It's so funny because I watched everybody last night after LeBron said it, and it was like, well, why would he retire? Why is this? Why would he ever walk away from the game? First off, because he's 38. But I don't think he's going to retire just yet, but I think next season is the feeling out season, where he starts to ask himself, do I keep playing if I can't keep being LeBron? And even dealing with everything he's dealt with, LeBron's dealt with injury in the playoffs before, different things like that. He didn't look like the same LeBron. Still looked like one of the most dominant players you've ever seen, but he didn't look like the same LeBron James, and he couldn't put the team on his back and put him over the top.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe there's something there. I don't know. Maybe next season we see who was it? Was it Vontae Davis? Wasn't it Vontae Davis that did that? Like middle of a game, he was like, "Hey, yo, I'm done." Literally
in the middle of a game.
Hey,
I don't think
season.
LeBron would do that, but I do think, you know, we don't like load management, but
yeah,
I think that's the only way. Like if LeBron comes back, there will be a lot of that, and people will whine about it, and I understand. I get it. And people will say, "Oh, well, you shouldn't."
39-year-old take a break.
You know, he's not going to have a Udonis Haslem-esque final season where he plays 7 games, but his body, he's human. This series showed that he's mortal. Yeah. And I don't, you know, people were giving him hell for that, his last shot, like that bent off the side of the backboard and the look that he got there. Like, this is, I don't know, like, they shouldn't have been in this spot in the first place. They had 55-1 odds, I want to say, at the trade deadline to make it to the NBA Finals. Yeah. And the fact that they got this far to the conference finals with the completely reworked roster where you have some one-dimensional players, you know, that they ended up trading for. I mean, D'Angelo Russell gives you offense. Jared Vanderbilt gives you defense. Like, they made it work the way that they had to, but nobody expected them to be here. So I can't buy into this BS that, oh my God, this is legacy defining for LeBron. They weren't supposed to be here in the first place, and he's 38 years old. This is not the same LeBron who had Kyrie Irving, you know, teamed up with him, which is a whole nother can of worms, you know, to come back from 3-1 deficit against the Warriors in 16. He was many years younger. That was 7 years ago. And he had a true star playing next to him. So if Kyrie ends up in LA, I know you saw him on court side, just like I did. I don't know how that's going to work. I guess bygones are bygones and everybody's fine and we love each other again. But, that's, man, that one is.
We got plenty to talk about this offseason. That's all I know.
That's
what gets me
the
excited.
NBA offseason is fantastic. It's the storylines upon storylines, the gift that keeps on giving.
Oh, it is, because every year it's just like immediately as soon as you think it dies down, it's just like Kevin Durant hates somebody again. Like, oh, here we go. We're back in, baby. Let's go. Katie hates somebody. Let's keep this thing going. Let's get into the second half here, Courtney, because
Third quarter.
there's still so much from OTAs to break down. This is again, second favorite time of year, probably outside of NBA offseason, is early on. One, because I still have hope in my team. And as you're looking at what we saw kind of coming in to OTAs, now actually getting to see that first couple of, well, you guys only saw today, right? They didn't let you in yesterday, but seeing today. What do you think the top position battles are to really keep an eye on coming into OTAs?
Receiver for, like, I was trying to do the depth chart in my head today. Like it's say you tell me I need to give you the 5 or the 6. So of course it's DJ Moore, Chase Claypool, Darnell Mooney, Tyler Scott, and then from there, it's anybody's guess. Yeah. Like, we saw Velus Jones get some good run today. The new kickoff rule will be very interesting to see how that affects him, because I don't think that there's going to be too many of those taken out. So I wonder what his role on special teams will become. Will they try him on punt return? Will they do stuff like that to get him there? So between him and of course, I think 5. I need to put 5 on there. Equanimous St. Brown, almost forgot about him. I mean, they re-signed him to that deal in December because he's a culture guy here. Like, he was with Luke Getsy in Green Bay. He blocks with intent. That job is not above him. They need somebody like that because they're a dominant rushing team. So there's my 5. Who's your 6? Like, that to me is just wild to think about, that Velus Jones may not make this roster. Dante Pettis, he could be competing with him for the 6th spot, because in the fact that that's not a lock. That was a 3rd-round pick from a year ago. And I said this earlier in one of our earlier shows after the draft. I think that Tyler Scott was a course correct for that move because of the speed and because he has higher upside and he's younger. Velus just turned 26 years old. So that one, even though like the majority of that room feels like it's set, that one is at the top of the list for me. Of course, the running back room. Like, if Roschon Johnson is all that in a bag of chips, and the buffet too that they have sold us on, that he is the greatest thing that they've ever drafted. Yeah. And I know there's some hyperbole in there, at least in how I'm talking about it, but really, like, listen to how they talk about this guy. The running back room is going to be so interesting. We just went and got
Barry Sanders. Like, that's really how they're talking about.
Pillar of the franchise. Like, I've never heard of a player who was drafted 5 seconds ago being referred to as somebody with that potential. But today in OTAs, you got to see, what the running backs, and this is a very early part of the install, but like some of the, running backs catching passes out of the backfield being utilized, in the screen game. Khalil Herbert did some, Deontay Foreman did some. And to watch Roschon Johnson next as he continues to get more incorporated into this offense, what is that going to look like? Because I think that that's going to be one of the more intriguing position battles as we get going into training camp. Like, who is the number 1 running back? And is the person who might start the season as a number 1 running back, will that person be there for that long, or could a Roschon Johnson potentially supplant him?
Did it feel like Andrew Billings was the clear-cut number 1 option on that defensive tackle? I heard Tremaine Edmonds talking about him. He literally just went, big dude. Like,
he's huge. He's huge. I thought that, like, he's big. And I expect he's a nose tackle. But, like, right. Zach Pickens, I remember seeing him at the podium and seeing him in rookie minicamp. But, like, we were kind of up close to where they were doing some sled work. And I was like, oh, my God, this guy's huge. Like, he was bigger than I thought. And so they have numbers there. So like that part where you go back to what Alan Williams said about the 3 technique, and that Justin Jones is their 3 technique right now. That could have either been like 2 things. That's either a cry for help to the front office that if you want us to go into the season with this guy playing 3 technique, because I don't believe that anybody else is equipped just yet to do that, like, go sign somebody. Or it's it's their belief that they have enough bodies there right now, and that somebody, whether it's Gervon Dexter, whether it's Zach Pickens, will end up like fighting for that role, that they like the competition that they have there. But obviously, I mean, Billings, is a pretty good run, is a good run stopper, and the sack numbers aren't there, but they don't have to be, because that wasn't, the role. That's not the role he plays in defenses. Like, you're not having him on the field for obvious passing downs. So I do think that is, for Tremaine Edmunds to come to a team where you have somebody who's going to be your first line of defense, so you just don't have free rushers coming at you 24/7. Like, that's important for a linebacker. That's something that really is going to like pique their interest. So I don't know if I put any stock into that, other than like that those are first impressions, and because I do anticipate like that being one of the position battles that we'll be looking at camp too.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, because especially like I feel like the Bears, I don't know if they went out and they got the best guys to make this defense a top 5 defense again. I'm not going to go out and say that, but I do think that they addressed a serious need that was an issue last season, and that was stopping anybody with the run game. Like, we were sitting there making, backup running backs look like the greatest running backs of all time last season. So it's good to see that it's addressed, and I like that at least early on Tremaine Edmunds felt comfortable with it. He actually ended up getting a little pick on PJ Walker out here. Shout out to him making an early impact. Was that a him play, or did everybody else make that play happen?
No, that was him. I mean, he is a read and react sort of moment. They were in their 2-minute end of half scenario, and they were down in the red zone. So like, this is something that Matt Eberflus said is going to be part of practice pretty much every day over the next 10 OTA practices that they have. And I thought that was, again, we were at the far end of the field, but from what you could see, and it was PJ Walker who threw the pick. Yes. And Edmunds, the way that he disguised the coverage and then read what the play was and was in the right spot to make that happen, just a good sign. Again, this is early on, but like, to see those sorts of moments, because in 7-on-7, Eberflus said, and that was obviously team, that was 11-on-11, but in 7-on-7, the ball should never hit the ground because they're not in that spot yet. So I don't want to like go all in and say, wow, the defense is so ahead of the offense, because there were a couple of moments like that today. It wasn't just, the Tremaine Edmunds one was the last one we saw, and it was kind of the splash play because he and the rest of the defense ran the entire other way, thinking it was a pick, believing it was a pick six. So it's a good moment. But I do, this defense typically comes together a little bit more quickly. I think during the off season, you're able to kind of like say, oh, that unit looks like, it looks like it's in a better spot. But my biggest takeaway from Tremaine Edmunds and, TJ Edwards was what Justin Fields said about them, like that. And he was asked about like the faith that this team has in him and like all of the acquisitions that they made for him to succeed. And like, when he's talking about we have guys who love football. Well, what does that mean? Yeah. Well, TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmunds they're here every day. They're in the training room, getting their prehab, all this stuff, but they bring a work ethic and an energy that Fields called contagious. Those are guys on the other side of the ball. And he's saying that's spreading to the entire team. So I think it's a really good sign that two players who came from organizations that were perennial playoff contenders. I mean, the Eagles just went to a Super Bowl. The Bills are always in the playoffs in the last couple of years. That has a trickle-down effect from where those guys can come in and dedicate that sort of attention to teaching other guys how to get to that level, so then the whole team can eventually get there.
Yeah. Hey, let's hope that this whole team does get there. I like what I'm hearing early on. I like what I'm seeing. And I like the fact that it seems like they actually like each other, right? Like they're going out to do stuff. Like, I will say this, having Briggs on, having Hester come on as a guest, Tommy Harris, McKee always in the building. The one thing that I take away from them on that 05 team is like they genuinely still like each other. And it tells you how important just having that camaraderie.
I mean, that group went to a Super Bowl. Like, you don't get there if you hate everybody's guts on your team. Like, there really is something to be said about close teams that, for me, it starts with the quarterback, and you can figure out who I'm talking about. But like I've covered teams where the quarterback hasn't exactly been the most revered human being on the team or hasn't been like the leader. Justin Fields, without question, is that guy.
Yeah.
And on the defensive side of the ball too, you can go back to locker cleanout day when Justin Jones, like out of nowhere, kind of like, the meme where it's like no one, nobody. Justin Jones, they need to start drawing up some plays for Justin Fields. We got a playmaker here. We can't wait to see what it looks like when he's actually in an off. Like I think his phrase was in an actual offense. So I was like, oh my God, when that happened. But like when you've got a defensive lineman who, frankly, I mean, I know that there's clicks on teams and guys kind of go where their position groups are, but like when they have that much support around the quarterback, like that's how you start to get this thing off the ground, where the belief's there, and that has to be the most important thing because we know how important that position is.
100%. Let's finish it out here. Fourth quarter. Quick fourth quarter because Courtney's had a very long day. and it will continue to be long, more than likely, because now there's going to be so many. You got to go write articles about everything that you've just said in here. What you got to do is get that Chat GPT, take all of your quotes from here, and then just add that. I mean, it's perfect.
How's that work? See, I need to like do some research into that. I don't know enough about the AI world, but maybe we can try it.
It is terrifying and amazing all at once. That's what I say about it. It's like, oh, like this is great for writing up a podcast or helping me with stuff like this, and then it's also like, oh, like the AI can just say yes for me and charge $1 million that I don't have to something. Perfect. But let's get into the fourth quarter, because one thing that I think is going to be very interesting in this NFL season is that Thursday night football flexing through week 13 through 17 has been approved, and it's going to be a thing. How do you believe that is going to help teams or hurt teams this season? Even with Eberflus talking about the too many buys that the Bears are going to have because of the Thursday night football helping him out.
Yeah, the flexing thing, I get it. I just find that, for a team that already has 2 games, like when does it start again? Refresh me. Like when is it week 14?
Week 13 through 17, right, Io?
Okay. So like they're 2 games. I'm looking at the schedule now. Washington is away on the 5th of October. That's week 5. And then week 10, they have Carolina at home. Frankly, their schedule might be like, of any team that does have the 2 Thursday night games, their schedule might be the best of like a situation that you're going to look at teams and say you never really can luck out, because on one end of that, the front end, you've got a day and a half to prepare for a game, and then you got the travel elements in there too, because they're going to Washington. So like you come off the home game against Denver, you got to turn around, and 3 days later you have to be there because they fly in on the 4th.
Right.
So like, but after that you have 10 days before you got Minnesota at home, and after the Carolina game at home, which of course, like, it's tough. You come back from New Orleans on the road in a very hostile environment and a tough place to play, middle of the season, and you've got a Thursday night game, but at least you're at home. Then you have 10 days off before you've got the back-to-back stretch of Detroit and Minnesota. So 2 pretty important division games there, and then you got your bye week. So if any team that has is going to have to deal with this and potentially be, theirs are, not in that flex window.
Right.
They can't really do much about it other than, I guess, say, hey, I guess we're glad that we don't have this in like an inopportune time, because you don't know how they're going to flex games in or out of those windows from 13 to the end of the season. So I'm not surprised. I mean, some of the rules changes and there's some of the things that were voted on in Minneapolis at the league meetings that came through. And of course, like the kickoff stuff is, special teams rules. It's not something that special teams coaches wanted. So I'm very curious to see, once I get a chance to kind of like really dive into that, like what the breakdown of how those rules passed was. But for the flexing of Thursday night games, I think they might have the best schedule of anybody who's dealing with 2 of those games in that window for when they happen, because they're both 5 weeks apart.
I thought about it in the sense of, right, if the Bears are a competitive team, or at least in the hunt, right, that the NFL is going to want to flex them possibly into one of those games. And I'm like, could we really be dealing with a situation where the Bears end up with a third Thursday night football game here? Like,
I don't think they'd be allowed to.
They're not allowed to,
because you're only allowed, like, now the rule is now that you have 2 games that you're eligible for. So, like, again, I have to read up on that. Like, could those 2 games
get moved
already?
Possibly?
Like, I don't think they can because they're before week 13. But if they only had 1, then they'd be able to be flexed into, like, in that week 13 and on. But frankly, right now, I think the schedule's pretty much set where unless they are the surprise team, and I know what people say about ESPN analytics because of the 3% chance that they gave the Miami Heat to win the game or to make it out of this series with the Boston Celtics. But, like, our FPI came out yesterday and they're exactly where you would expect to have the Bears to be. I tweeted it. I think they're at 7.8 wins.
Yeah.
So that's what you and I have been talking about. Like, I think 7 to 8 wins is a team that's probably not getting flexed. Probably, any of those spots where they're at, like in their games, their Sunday night game is Halloween. So, or Halloween weekend. So that's before the window. Typically, that's before the window opens. And, they got that Monday night game against the Vikings. Like, they're pretty much set, I think, for like where we're going to like see them this year. I wouldn't be expecting many times unless it was something about the other team, maybe a team that becomes playoff eligible with a win. Like, maybe they could be flexed for that reason.
I didn't even think of, I guess I didn't even think of it from that aspect, right? Like, they could technically be flexed into a Thursday night game if they're the away team or they're not the team that's being flexed in, right?
Well, I don't think they're allowed. They're not allowed, I don't think, to play more than like 2 Thursday night games. Again, I have to like read up on that some more, but they've got their allotment where they will have played 2 by the time flexing even begins.
Yeah, let's hope it stays that way. That's all I'm saying. Like, I don't need any. I like the Bears schedule. I really do. Like, I like how the rest lays out. The fact that technically we do have 2 times during the season where we have 10 days off, I believe, and then we have a bye week.
Sure.
So I like how the Bears schedule sits. I kind of wish this was a schedule that was coming in when I believe we were going to be a lot more competitive, but that's neither here nor there. That's another episode of the Chicago Bears podcast. As always, appreciate you for coming on, Courtney. This is going to be one of our biggest days of the week, this and Thursdays, because you're just the wealth of knowledge that can ask all the questions to Coach Flus that we want. So we appreciate that as always. Make sure you guys are hitting that like button, subscribe to the page, and make sure that you are tuning in Monday through Friday on the ESPN Chicago app or wherever you get your podcast. As always, it's Pat the Designer back at it again for Courtney Cronin. You guys stay safe out there, Chicago. Bear down. We got football back. Thank God. Peace.